Hello everyone, this is part 23 of What If Naruto was in Anbu at 6, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Baki sighed as he read over the doents on, as of now, his desk. His stewardship of K's no Kuni was mired with a feeling of unrest and mild panic from the people. Konoha marshaled their forces directly upon the doorstep, threatening their border garrisons. Small skirmishes were already breaking out throughout the northern defensive lines as Konoha poked and prodded at them, their assaults testing the will of the troops and the competence of the field commanders. Baki was a commander, he had led troops into battle before. But being in charge of a single battalion could never compare to being in command of all of them, and even though he needed not worry of the morale of his men, considering the cries of outrage and righteous anger the rumors of Gaara, Temari and Kankuro's death during Naruto's attack on Kumo had brought. The demands for revenge were driving him on, but that would only take them so far. Konoha had more troops, more weapons, more supplies and many more ships in the Kiri Navy, especially considering Suna had no navy at all. Baki knew his limits, he knew what he could and could not do. And he knew that he wasn't fit to lead his nation to victory, there was too much at stake, there were too many chess pieces to bring together and organize at once. He could not do this for long, he would mess up eventually. Suna needed a leader. They needed Gaara, but if he truly was then Baki wasn't sure what they could do. Just then, a scuffle was heard outside the door, startled gasps reaching his ears before the doors to the office he currently occupied were thrown wide open, revealing the very object of his thoughts standing at the doorway as if he'd been summoned. His red hair standing out among the heavy dark brown robes and light background that was the sunlit hallways of the office. Baki shot to his feet, mouth agape as he struggled to find words at the sight of his once-upon-a-time student. Kazekage-sama. The redhead's sharp green eyes turned onto his old sensei as he nodded, his stride swallowing tiles as he walked around his desk and towards his seat, watching as Baki backed away to stand beside the table, vacating it. Baki. His voice was clipped and tight like the crack of a whip. The Junin unconsciously tensed at the sound of it. Temari is being held prisoner by Konoha. I want the northern border guards to hold tight on the defenses. Order the northeastern units to push the attack into the enemy outposts in river country and the northwestern forces to strike at the border guards in Kusa and Taki. Send 3 Anbu units down to the trade city of Sugi. There will be ships there that will be waiting to carry them deep into T country, to attack Konoha where they would least expect it. Baki, still in a state of shell shock over Gaara's sudden reappearance, could only stare stupidly at his former pupil as the man retook charge of the village in mere moments, adjusting himself into the role of high commander. Doing in seconds what he had been conflicted about for nearly 2 weeks. Gaara's eyes turned to him, the gazes meeting as he continued to stare. Today would be nice, he said wryly. Snapping out of his daze, the Kazekage's former teacher shook himself out of the stupor before bowing respectfully to his commander. Yes, Kazekage-sama. Before marching out of the office. Some men were born to lead and others were born to follow. Gaara was a natural leader, he was born to lead, and a spark of hope lit up in Baki's mind that their cage was back and with him. Whether he was more powerful than the Kyuubi Jinchuriki or not, it would not matter, for Suna would attain their final victory. Suna read over the medical files as she walked towards the room that housed Sabaku no Kankuro. It had been nearly 2 days since Akina's death. Yugito had been inconsolable since then, as had been Shizune. All 3 of them had buried themselves in their work. Yugito refused to look at either of the medics. Shizune, ever the proper Shizune. Suna had seen her hesitance, her eyes pleading for the answer as to what had happened to the girl that had driven her to do what she did. 4 of the guards out of the 20 that had been guarding the base were in critical, another 12 were injured. The 4 commanding officers were alright thankfully, if suffering from mild chakra exhaustion. Amazingly, none of them were suffering chakra poisoning from overexposure to the kitsune's chakra. One of the medics on hand at the station was something of an expert in dealing with those kids off. She stopped in the middle of the hallway, going deathly still. No, that was no coincidence, they had been prepared for her attack. But that didn't make sense. If they had been prepared, they would have known how to subdue her, they would have been ready to implement the countermeasures Zhu Liang no doubt had in place in case of this eventuality. Unless they were told not to. Unless they were told to let her escape. A single name sprang to the front of her mind. Zhu Liang. But, she shook her head, he wouldn't do this. Would he? What reason did he have to? Akina was his apprentice. He had practically become a second father to the girl, raised her since she came here at 12 years old. He wouldn't have ordered this, he wouldn't have ordered her like this, right? Sunad shook her head, pushing these thoughts away. It was ridiculous, unthinkable. He wouldn't do that, no one could be so cold. But still, despite her vehemence, somewhere in the back of her mind the seed of doubt had taken root and would soon spread like a fungal bloom, as it always does once it's in place inside person's mind. She approached the door, not bothering to knock as she knew he would have no visitors with his brother back in sooner and his sister captured. The only person that could be in the room would be Shizuka, a nurse she had assigned to his care personally. When Gaara had left, she had promised that she would see that his brother was taken care of, and she was a woman of her word. Opening the door, she saw Kankuro turn his boredom-weary eyes to face her. There was a small stand that held a book in front of him, operated by slight nudges of his chakra in order to turn the page. It was difficult reading the pages considering he couldn't even move his end, but with 6 pillows keeping him in a slightly angled position he was managing. Snapping his eyes to her, the boy's eyes took on a look of relief mixed with a sense of true joy that finally the boredom and the monotony could be expelled from him, at least for a few moments with her visit, even if the visit would not bring jokes and laughter to him. Sunad smiled and Kankuro managed to return the gesture as he greeted. Sunad-sama. He tried to sound happy at her arrival, he really did, but the slight trepidation that shook his voice belied his nervousness. Kankuro-san. How are you feeling today? She questioned, pushing away her previously grim thoughts in order to give a bright countenance to one of the patients whose situation was most grim. She walked over to the side of his bed, quickly checking several of the pieces of equipment that were strapped to him. The IV tubes currently providing antibiotics and other medications for the up-and-coming operation. Finally, she allowed herself to sit at the side of the bed, watching as Kankuro's eyes followed her movements. Well, Kankuro-san, I'm not going to beat around the bush with small talk because I know you're not the type for it, and neither am I. The operation you've chosen to undertake is very dangerous. The procedure would require surgery on several of the clavicle discs, which are along your upper spinal cords. The majority of these have suffered splinters, small hairline fractures as well. The shards of bone are pressing against the nerves that run along your spine, and that is what is paralyzing you. The procedure would remove the discs and replace them with artificial ones. This will grant you movement again in your arms and down to your waist. But that's where we come to the difficult part, isn't it? She muttered almost to herself before continuing, seeming to visibly sag with her sigh. Because you have recently undergone an operation in your lower spine already, they were much more fragile than normal when you received your injury. Because of that, well. Kankuro kept a tense silence. He never expected the news to be good, by any stretch of the imagination, but expectations could never compare to the actual experience of having to hear it. He couldn't deal with her attempts at sugarcoating it though. He needed to just hear it and get it over with. He could take it. Sunad-sama, just say how bad it is. The blonde Sanin looked into his stubbornly determined eyes and sighed. To be frank, the chances that we will be successful in the second operation is about the same chance a snowball has for a long life in an oven. The operation can only be attempted once, safely, so this will be our only second operation is also very dangerous, and the chance of death is an estimated 39%. You may not want to take such a huge risk for an operation that has such a high probability of being ineffective anyway. Kankuro sighed, stiffening his expression, the realization of the cold hard truth that he may never walk fully settling into his mind. Somehow he had always known, maybe even from the very second after he had woken up in this hospital. But he didn't want to accept it. Being a ninja was his entire life. How could all those years he'd devoted himself to this, how could it all just be taken from him because of one single moment? One single mistake. He fought to hold back tears, not willing to show such emotional weakness to one of the most legendary ninja of their time. Sunad had to admire him for that. She had no doubt that when she left this room he would let his tears fall, but never while she was here. A strong young man, a fine ninja. If you truly want me to proceed with the operation, I will, but. No. He sighed softly, interrupting her. No. I can't decide right now. I just need time. He said, fighting hard to swallow the lump that formed in his tea, to keep his voice steady and even. Sunad nodded as she stood up. I understand, she said, bowing once to the young man who now had his eyes closed in order to hide his quickly vanishing composure. She slipped from the room quietly, closing the door with naught but a sound to show for it. The weary woman rested against it for a moment, closing her own eyes to fight her emotions away, to keep them from bubbling up to the surface. To those who say that the role of a medic ninja is self-gratifying work, a wonderful experience that allowed you to give new hope to those without any, she could easily say that they were lying through their teeth, or that they hadn't been at the job long. That load was given to reel you into the job, either by a recruiter or the naive dreams of children. Every day she had to go through countless kankuros. The hundreds she helped, the ones she actually did save. The gratified faces, even the looks of appreciation of their loved ones could never come close to having the same impact the look of a man whom you needed to inform his daughter S on the operating table, or whose illness could not be treated and he would S in less than a year. The looks of Grodd, more frequent with her skill true, all melded seamlessly together. Like droplets of water into a stream. But those cases, those few cases who you needed to be the one to take away their last hope, to S it off of them and leave them bare, leaving them out in the harsh storms without even a single cloak to block the biting chill of the wind. Those were like drops of B in the water, those you could see. Those you could continue to see for a very long time. Sunad sighed, shaking her head before she pushed herself away from the door heading towards her next patient. Yue Ying. Several minutes later, the medic knocked on her door, receiving the light voice of the Raikage's wife in response. It's open. Sunad twisted the knob, opening it with a click as she entered the room, receiving a bright smile from the woman in greeting. Sunad. The slug princess nodded, returning the smile with one of her own. Ying, how have the treatments been? She questioned, pulling up a chair. They've been going very well. The doctors and nurses say that with a few more weeks of physical therapy and continued medication I should be back on my feet. They've been going so well I never would have thought you would come to see me personally. What happened with the village and with Akina, unless of course there's been a complication. No, there hasn't been any complication. Sunad said hastily, but was confused as she watched Ying sigh. The rust-brown hair seemed to frame the woman's face, her sharp green eyes meeting Sunad's gaze, a look of sadness passing over her gentle features. This has to do with Akina, doesn't it? Sunad looked visibly startled, as the woman's words had caught her off guard. How did you? Normally you would have gotten defensive and said something like, what, can't I come see a friend of mine? The Kumo Kanoiki interrupted, a sigh making its way past her lips, her voice forlorn and saddened. She had been affected, just like most people who had known the girl, by Akina's death. She tried not to let how much the loss had truly affected her be revealed in front of the others. A ninja must show no emotion after all. That rule applied doubly as much for high-ranking ninja, and triple for political figures. She was all three with her husband being who he was. But Akina had been precious to her. She wouldn't have called it the relationship between a mother and a daughter, but an aunt and a niece, perhaps that at least. Sunad lowered her gaze, biting her lip for a moment, wondering just how thin the ice she was about to cross actually was. Ying, I don't know really how to say this, but I've been having thoughts. She ended, trailing off uncertainly as she debated whether or not to continue this conversation. Fortunately, the thought was finished for her. You suspect Juge may have been involved? Ying said simply, bringing her eyes back to Sunad's face as the woman kept her gaze away. Sunad expected something out of the woman, some kind of vehemence or anger, but never in her life would she have expected the words that came from Ying's mouth. Yes, I suspect the same. The medic snapped her gaze back around, meeting Yue Ying's downtrodden gaze as the woman looked out to the village, catwalks and construction equipment laying strewn across the street, the sound of tools and woodworking having faded into the background of her mind long ago. Yue Ying took a breath before continuing. I truly hope these suspicions are unfounded and that you and I are simply too used to him to not suspect that he didn't have something prepared to stop her. But Tsunade sighed, seeing that this conversation was upsetting her long-time friend, despite her attempts to hide it. She decided to see it short. You know him better than anyone, do you think he may have done? She couldn't finish her sentence, but once again she didn't have to. Ying shook her head, small locks of her hair falling over her eyes. Honestly, I don't know. Tsunade nodded, before she stood, and left the room, a shiver passing through her body and not due to the air conditioner of the hospital. Yue Ying fell back, her head resting against the wall as she released a weary sigh. She had always known a life as the wife of Zhuge Liang wouldn't be easy, she had chosen this, she had chosen him. She loved her husband, she really did, and he had proven on several previous occasions that while he may lie to the world, he was always honest with her, even if he didn't want to be at the moment. But still, she could only stand by and watch so much of her husband's plans before needing to pull him back. His intentions were always in the right place, that was true. But in his belief that the end justifies the means, she had seen him do truly evil things. She had always learned to accept it, to accept him. To forgive his actions because she loved him. Not his law, not his power. She loved him, and it had led her to the strength necessary to forgive and accept who he was and what he did. Did that make her evil as well? Perhaps, but she could accept that too. It was not an easy thing to admit, that the man you loved was considered nothing short of a monster by some. She could only hope that he was not involved in Akina's death, because if he was, then she wasn't sure if she could simply accept and forgive. Not this time. Temari sighed tiredly as she leaned back in one of the many chairs of the library, a book clasped in her hand about the history of Konoha and several of its legendary ninja men like Hatake Sakumo, and one of the people who had helped found Konoha with the Shodaime, the Konoiki Shizuka, who was said to have had a mastery of the wind element unmatched even by the Yondaime. She wondered if the same could be said concerning Konoha's current cage, but she wouldn't dwell on that. Hinata had left earlier, returning to her clan estate to get some rest. That was by no means an indication that her guards had also left their post. She could still feel their various chakra signatures, slightly hidden, but they weren't really trying. They wanted her to know that they were there. It was ironic, really. The Anbu were the best of the ninja villages, second only to the select few chosen to be hunter ninja. Their skills were for the most difficult of missions. The most respected and feared of the ranks and classes, but more it was that they feared their new master. She just couldn't understand it. She really couldn't. Her brother was a cage, powerful as well as respected. His subordinates followed his orders out of admiration of his leadership skills and respect for his abilities, not fear of them. But these ninja followed this man, not out of respect but out of fear. She could tell. The way they tensed when his footsteps echoed form down the hallways, the way they hid their presence enough to utterly vanish from her awareness altogether, not re-emerging until they were certain he was far gone, like rats scuttling away to cower in the shadows. She just couldn't understand how they could serve under such an individual for long. Any man or woman would hesitate to attack someone they loved or respected in order to defend herself or himself, but a woman wouldn't hesitate to at least attempt to defend herself against a rapist, the same as a man would attempt to defend himself against a thief or any other assailant despite their fear of the individual. Hell, her fear had certainly done nothing to deter her from fighting him at Sakai. She shook her head again, sighing as she looked up to the ceiling. Closing her eyes to rest them, she released a frustrated sigh, wishing that she was just somewhere else, anywhere else but in this place. Maybe on a beach, yay. A beach that was completely deserted, with warm sands beneath her and white waves cooling them as they came to and fro. The sun would be warm with no glare. Oh yay, that's where she needed to be. Once she escaped from this place and the war was over and done with, she would be certain to take a long vacation, and she would find that place, and when she did, not even Gaara would be able to pry her away from it. Her little daydream took her a little too deep into her own mind, because the next thing she heard was the bitingly cold voice of her host. You should train those senses of yours more, Temari-san. Snapping her sharp silver eyes open, she sat ramrod straight in her chair, dropping her book as she gripped the armrests of the seat in surprise, her gaze snapping over to the left, finding Naruto standing at the doorway. Her heart leapt up to her tea for a moment, but settled as he walked toward the other end of the library, apparently in search of a book and not her. Thank the gods. With his back turned to her, she was able to visibly regain herself, stealing her features and her emotions before she growled. It's Sabaku to you. She snarled. Her voice made him pause in his tracks, and for a moment her heart skipped a beat in fear that she may have angered him. But he merely turned his head back, looking at her with a slightly raised eyebrow over his shoulder before continuing his walk towards the shelf that held whatever book he was looking for. She watched him finger through several of the works, merely giving them minute glances as his eyes ghosted over the les before moving on to the next. Resisting the urge to run from the room, or fidget in the chair, she leaned back against the soft leather again, attempting to give herself some air of nonchalance. Though she wasn't sure how successful she could be under the circumstances, she still gave it an effort. So when do you plan on starting? She called to him from her side of the room. Starting? He questioned, giving another short look over his shoulder. Your interrogation. I know you've got one set up soon. She answered, keeping the steely edge in her voice. Naruto turned back to his books, finally pulling one from the shelf, the lure of which read, Advanced Economics. He spoke as he turned back to her, walking towards her with slow, calm steps, watching as she tensed up, her fingers tightening around the leather of the armrests as she swallowed but still stubbornly met his gaze. You misunderstand the situation, Temari. He spoke her name with a slow drawl, taunting her with it, making her skin crawl with a lacing anger with the tone and for the fact she had told him he couldn't use that name, though she never had expected that to hold any weight. It was the principle of the thing. But before she could say anything, he continued in that same tone. There is no need to do such a thing given the circumstances. I do not wish to burn sooner simply to rebuild it later. The infrastructure must be intact once the war is done and the last of the villages are under my control. No, I will barter your life, in exchange for control of Suna. Then why don't you simply keep me in one of your prison cells? Or is it simply because I'm the Kazekige's sister that I'm getting special treatment? She questioned, slowly gaining true confidence in her speech as she realized that he was not prone to tear her tea out just yet. He still needed her very much alive. And though she detested the notion of being used in such a way against her own brother, he didn't intend to give him the chance to carry such an attempt out. Because as I have stated previously, Zhu Liang has already proven he is more than willing to KU before. I do not doubt he's still quite as willing now as he was then. What? Liang? Temari began but soon trailed off as memories of the day she first woke up came back to her, Naruto's strange words just before she had lost consciousness. She had been too preoccupied after she had woken up the second time to really recall the conversation, but this was almost exactly the same. Naruto seemed to be willing to speak about it again without question, apparently having expected her not to remember. You claimed the day I woke up that Liang tried to K us before. What did you mean by that? I don't remember Liang trying to K me, only you. Naruto nodded. Liang is a genjutsu specialist. He manipulated both you and your siblings to engage me in the Battle of Kumo with a genjutsu he pulled over your eyes. In hopes that with your deaths, you could become martyrs that could rally Suna into opposing me. Your deaths are inconsequential to him. The fact that I did not kill you obviously upset his plans, as it has allowed me to bring you here, and so he is likely to try and attack you again. If only for the sake of keeping this information from reaching Gaara from the one source he will believe. You. My estate is far more secure than any prison can ever be, which is why you are here and not there. The men here know very well what the price for allowing it to harm you is. You will be well guarded until your use is complete. Temari glowered like a wolf, barely restraining herself from striking out at him, if only because of the knowledge that any such attempt would be an exercise in futility. She knew that whatever he told her needed to be taken with a grain of salt. Very little of what he said could, or should be trusted explicitly. For all she knew, he could say this so that she could tell Gaara after she escaped, and destroy whatever hope the Alliance may have of opposing him. Of course, this information wouldn't matter if he traded her for control of Suna. Meaning she needed to get out of here, and she needed to discover the truth, if there even was any, of his words for herself. Naruto stepped forward again, this time even more slowly, and whatever tension had bled out of the woman shot right back into her system as he towered over her sitting form. You do realize with these circumstances, Temari-san, that even should you, by some miracle, escape this place, you would all but sign your death warrant. Temari drew in a breath at that, watching as he turned and walked out of the room, the cage robes vanishing as he rounded the corner. He was right, of course. If what he told her was true, then Liang wouldn't allow her to come within 100 feet of a Suna or Kumo base. But then again, this only added to the fact that his story may not be true, considering the fact that this was simply more motivation to have her stay put. The sooner Kunoiki sighed, her eyes now heavy and tired, a headache pounding at her temples as she forced the thoughts away, wondering if it was safe to get up and begin heading back to the room. Spreading out her senses, she knew it was safe. She could feel the presence of the Anbu again. An inky blackness was draped over her mind. Her thoughts were hazy, her sight distorted, diluted, unseeing. Her mouth was dry, as if filled with ash. Tendrils of shadow shifted in her sight as she struggled to ell their blackened veil to see the world around her, but her success was a small one, merely catching a brief flicker of brown drapes hanging on the ceiling, illuminated by firelight before the world darkened again. A voice, distant, childlike, "Ell the veil then," words melded together to form an incomprehensible gurgle in her ears. She felt something, a warm hand over her head, the sensation being the only thing she could cling to, the only thing her mind was aware of. But soon even that warm comfort was gone and the cold grip of sleep seemed to creep back up to claim her. It was later when she felt a small repeated pressure at her ribs, the slight nudges jostling her from one side to the other, feeling a small groan of pain escape her as the voice, one she knew to be a child, spoke. It was so distant but yet so close, the words were once again distorted and incomprehensible, leaving the young woman grasping feebly at them before she sick bed. Zhu Liang stood behind his desk. A report from his Anbu captain held loosely, almost dazedly in his hand as his eyes ghosted over a single fragment of a sentence over and over again. Now believed to have S from drowning. The Anbu captain shifted uneasily from foot to foot, watching as Liang's jaw twitched and clenched, his jawline tightening as his fingers rubbed tensely over the paper. Leave was the single tight word that escaped the Raikage's lips, and the captain was more than happy to oblige. Bowing hastily, he vanished before he was even upright. Liang stared at the paper, his body tensing more and more with every passing second, winding itself tight as the veteran shinobi tried to control himself, to take his emotions and bury them under the layers of ice that had long been in the making throughout the course of his life, to smother them in the biting cold of it and remain true to the shinobi code that had been indoctrinated into his system since before he had even made his first K. But it was to no avail, and in a display of rage rarely seen by the Raikage, he flung the paper to the side and punched down on his desk with enough force to break the wooden furniture in two, its legs buckling as the papers and files that had been neatly organized on top of it drifted lazily down to the ground, having been jostled from their place. The strength seemed to leave Liang then as he collapsed back onto his chair, closing his eyes, and this time he was able to rein in his anger. A lesser man may have destroyed the entire office rather than just a single desk. As it stood, his breathing was heavy, his hands clenched, tightening on the armrests of his chair until the bee seemed to drain from his fingertips due to the force of his grip. He realized with some detachment that he was very glad Sunad was still in the hospital, because at the moment he wasn't sure he would be able to deal with the questions and accusations with a clear head, and he knew they would be coming. But apparently fate had denied him this brief time to fully gather himself and his thoughts as another woman entered the room, one that would prove to be far more troublesome, yet for slightly different reasons. He let his head fall back, resting against the soft leather of his chair as his dark brown eyes took in the appearance of his wife. An images that would normally calm his spirit and bring a smile, however slight, to his face, but now, with what he knew was going to be brought, her image wrought only a magnification to the weariness that shrouded him, as well as a sharp, almost physically painful of what could only be described as guilt. His C. Guilt over what, however, he did not know. Guilt due to Akina's death. Perhaps. Guilt due to the fact that he had hidden so many things from her, and everyone. Or perhaps it was the guilt due to the knowledge that the deaths of so many people had come to pass, for a cause that now seemed nearly as lost as their lives were. With Akina's death, he just wasn't sure if they could win any more. The Kazekage was strong, true, Yugito was strong as well, but he had been riding everything on Akina, on the hope that she could one day become strong enough to stand toe-to-toe against Naruto with another Jinchuriki at her side. Whether that would be Gaara or Yugito, it did not matter. She would need their help, true, but she was the catalyst of his plans. And now, she was S. And he had so much life, for nothing. Yes, he could safely say that guilt was the emotion that was his heart right now. Yue Ying looked at him, her soft brown eyes striking deep. His head was slightly bowed, his temple resting against a closed fist, her rust-red hair fanning out behind her, trailing down to her waist. The light of the sun shined against it, making seem like a crowning halo. When she spoke, her voice was tired, holding something akin to resignation. Do you have anything to say? Liang took a deep breath as he sighed. Does it truly look like I planned for this? He questioned back, gesturing to the broken desk. Did you? She shot back, now glaring at him, her voice gaining a very dangerous edge. Liang stood up from his chair, the simmering anger returning as he began to make his way out the door, only for Ying to latch onto his wrist with a firm grip, stopping him before he could leave. Zhuge Liang, did you have anything to do with what happened to her? There was a silence that seemed to suffocate the entire room. It was heavy, stifling, as a myriad of thoughts and emotions passed through Liang's eyes before he finally turned to face his wife. She was not supposed to s. Ying reeled from the words as if she'd been physically struck, her eyes widening. She pulled back her hand as if it was scalded by his touch, backing away several steps. You were behind this. No. He spoke firmly as he turned to face her fully. No. It was never supposed to be like this, she was never supposed to s. What could you have possibly wanted to accomplish with this? She questioned, shaking her head in disbelief. What were you trying? I was trying to let her go. He snapped before visibly sagging with a heavy sigh, rubbing the bridge of his nose, looking to his wife's suspicious gaze before he continued. She couldn't remain here in the state she was in. She would have been driven mad and been a danger to both herself and others. I wanted to simply let her go, gather herself for a while, then later I would bring her back. Ying's eyes held him with wariness, refusing to believe her husband would lie to her but not discounting the possibility either. If you wanted to let her go, then why not simply do it? Why have her pursued by your Anbu to the point where she preferred death over returning here? You know what a dangerous precedent that would set. With us at war, one cannot simply allow a ninja to just leave the village with no knowledge of when or if she would return with my blessings. You know better than anyone the damage such blatant favoritism would cause. The Anbu would understand if explained, but younger, less experienced ninja would certainly not. Defections and desertions would be on the rise, and even with our full strength with Akina in our ranks, winning this war was always at best a 50 out of 50 shot, the raven-haired man explained as calmly as he could given the circumstances. Still, Ying looked away, refusing to meet his eyes. She wanted to believe his words, she truly did, but if he was willing to do this, to betray Akina, a girl he had been closer to than anybody else other than her and Yugito in years, then, she just wasn't so sure he wasn't willing to do the same with her anymore. Zhuge Lian's previous dispassionate countenance melted away as he felt the sting of rejection from his wife's visible suspicion of him. He stepped forward slowly, raising the back of his hand to caress her cheek, bringing her eyes up to meet his own. Ying, he whispered, raising his other hand to caress the opposite cheek as he let his head tip forward, his forehead resting on her crown as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath. You know I would never lie to you. Do I? She questioned softly, her hands gripping the front of his clothing, pulling him closer towards her as a few faint tears stung at the corner of her eyes. Do I really, Liang? If you're Naruto must be stopped. You know that. He see her off as gently as he could. At what cost? She questioned, pulling away from him, staring into his eyes with a strange form of pleading. Zhuge Liang gripped her hand in his. Any that I can give, he said softly before continuing in a stronger tone. Naruto must be stopped, and if I have to be remembered solely as a tyrant in history to do so, I will do it. But please, he said, his voice slightly thicker with emotion as he stared deep into her eyes. I need you by my side. I cannot do this without you, Ying. She looked at him then, not with just her eyes, she truly looked at him, the veil he shielded himself with from the world, and slowly leaned into him, accepting his embrace as she clutched the hem of his robes. I will always stand by you, Zhuge Liang. She whispered, ignoring the sting of tears as they trailed down her cheeks. The sleeping dragon sighed in relief, hugging her tight as he kissed the crown of her long rust-red hair. My Ying. My Yue Ying. Yes, she was his Yue Ying, and though he may not admit it often, he knew that if he needed to her love to win this war, even he could not pay so high a cost. Because truly, though he claimed her to be his, it was he that belonged to her. Naruto sat in his office, a file held in his hand as he stared at the Chunin messenger, the man shifting uneasily from foot to foot as Naruto's sharp blue eyes glared into his own. You are certain this report is accurate? The Chunin nodded hastily. Yes, sir. Our spies in Kumo have confirmed it through several highly reliable sources. Though his voice was as sure as possible, the slight tremor in it told Naruto quite clearly of the man's unease at being in this office with him. Naruto's eyes trailed back down to the file. You may leave, he said with a wave of his hand, and the young messenger was quite happy to follow said orders as he quickly bowed, turned and practically ran from the room. Naruto slowly laid the files down on his desk, the papers shifting a bit with the momentum of their fall. He stood, his robes fluttering in the afternoon breeze as he made his way to the balcony, watching as the orange-hued sun began its slow descent beneath the horizon. So, you have taken your own life then, dear sister. Or perhaps, a ploy, by Zhu Liang? No, no. Not this time. No, you yet live. If nothing else, I know this to be true. What shall you do now, I wonder, my foolish sibling? Will you fight the world? Vanish from it? Or perhaps there is yet a part of your hatred that remains? So deep in his contemplation was the cage, that he barely caught the sound of his door creaking open. Turning his head slightly to the side, he saw his secretary Suzume enter the office. In her hands were a stack of files which she hefted onto his desk with a grunt. Reports from the front, Hokage-sama. She sighed as she wiped some sweat off her brow. Naruto walked back into the office, his hands ghosting over the reports before he opened the first one and began trailing his eyes over it. Suzume watched him work with his near-mechanical efficiency, making no show of taking a short break after her long walk up those stairs with all those reports. You'd think that with all their advancements in ninjutsu they would think of an easier way for people to get all the way up here, maybe some kind of box that brought people up with pulleys. Now there was an interesting concept. Suzume shook her head away from those daydreams. Unlike most ninja of the village, she had to speak and interact with Naruto on a near day-to-day basis. Much of her initial fear had dissipated within the first year. Oh sure, she knew he could tear her apart with his bare hands if he really wanted to, but because she had proven to be a little too good at her current job, many of her transfer requests had been denied, and she wasn't quite willing to test her luck on failing Naruto too many times. He may very well K her rather than simply get her transferred in exchange for a new secretary. So being figuratively stuck in this position, that paid quite well, she had decided that living in a work environment of constant fear wasn't necessarily healthy. And so had been working on shedding some of that fear for a long time, and had proven to be mostly successful at it, which meant that she allowed herself to teeter over the proverbial edge that was Naruto's temper more than most would ever dream. So it was with little to no hesitation that she peered over his desk, catching sight of the file already laid out there. What's this one about? She questioned, reaching down for it and picking it up. She only caught a brief glimpse of a few lines before the paper was snatched out of her hand. Hey, she cried out in protest and surprise as Naruto snapped the file shut. This is not for your eyes, he said in that same flat tone before he walked towards one of the many file cabinets and stuffed it in. Geez, you could have just said, put that down, rather than snatch it out of my hand. She grumbled to herself, but stopped when she caught sight of him staring at her with that look that almost always meant something akin to, I suggest you find somewhere else to be. Still, she decided to test her luck out a bit more this day. I saw female and presumed S. I assume it's some kind of nuke nin or some high-ranking enemy Kunoichi, right? What does it matter to you? Naruto questioned as he walked back and began to read through the reports again. She shrugged. It doesn't, I suppose, what with her S and all. She's not S. Naruto spoke. Huh? Suzume questioned with a confused air. How do you know? Because I haven't K her yet. Naruto interrupted her, already having known her question. Suzume took that as her cue to leave. Right. Well, I still have work to do. Good evening, Hokage-sama, she said with a quick bow. Naruto nodded, not even turning to face her as he heard the door close behind him. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.